You're listening to a joint podcast episode from Eden Church and Uncommon City, two communities walking together through the prayer practice. Each week, we're creating a space for honest conversation about what it really means to talk to God, listen to His voice, listen for His voice, and live a life shaped by prayer. These episodes aren't polished teachings at all. They're sort of real-time reflections with voices from our communities. Whether you're listening on your commute, during a walk, or with journal in hand, we're glad that you're with us. Let's take a breath and enter into the conversation. Now, for more information about Eden Church, visit edenchurchclt.com, and to learn more about Uncommon City, visit uncommon.city. Let's get into it.
I am Caleb, currently pastor teaching in Vision at Eden. We planted September 2024, so we're still a little baby, and we are, loving it. I'm enjoying it. It is very much a bright spot for me on Sundays. Primarily my role there is teaching vision and then just leader development, trying to give away what's appropriate, but also seeing more and more people carry the work. That's been kind of our MO, has been just shared leadership. So that's primarily what I do with Eden.
My name's Brittany. I'm also with Eden. Caleb and I had known each other from a previous church experience, and my husband and I were really excited to join him. I am a deacon. I think we're in process. We're figuring things out. As Caleb said, we're a baby church, so titles and all of the logistics are still in flux. But I preach occasionally, and primarily I feel really called to the women and the young parents in our church. It's just a huge area that I feel like the Lord is asking me to give myself to and to spend time in prayer and community for, as well as those that have been hurt by the church or are considering and reconstructing. These are all things that I feel really passionate about and am excited to partner with Caleb on. And then at least once a week, I am a sounding board for Caleb to call so we can talk through some things and have additional thoughts on and figure out if we need to pull someone or ask a group question or simply make a decision. Neither of us are overtly decisive, so these calls are often us hoping that the other one will have a strong opinion on something, but it's a lot of fun. I feel really honored to be back in a formal ministry space.
I'm Simone, and I am co-lead pioneer of Uncommon City, and mostly I just kind of oversee worship and we'll lead worship together. Occasionally I do teach, but we are also a baby church. We're a baby community, and it's just been a lot of fun getting to do ministry in a way that we've not really been able to do ministry before, outside of the confines and the structure of like Big C Church that you and I are probably all pretty used to. And it's been really sweet and really awesome and really brand new in all kinds of ways. So we're also having a lot of fun.
And I'm Miko. My title is Lead Pioneer at Uncommon City, and we're just planting something special, I think, in the city of St. Pete, and I'm happy to sort of be at the helm of that. I'm so glad that we get to come together and talk on this podcast about what we've been journeying through together over the last 4 weeks. I'm curious, before we jump into that conversation, I want to back up a little bit so that both Eden and Uncommon City has a good idea of where both communities are finding themselves as we've entered into the prayer practice. So Caleb, Brittany, why don't you guys just sort of tell me what the church is up to sort of in this season? What's the general feeling? What's the environment? What's the context? Bring us into Eden.
So like Caleb mentioned, we are new. We are figuring things out, but we are largely made up of people that I think feel, I don't want to say disillusioned, but just kind of, Simone, like you were saying, are craving a different experience than the traditional American Big C church. And some of it is due to hurt, and some of it is just due to really loving a more communal environment where it's a little bit more intimate. We get to share a meal every Sunday, which we know is not sustainable or scalable forever, but for right now, it is really sweet and it is really intimate. And there's a lot of grace. There's a lot of flexibility for let's figure this out together. And we get a lot of open discussion time, which is hugely valuable. That's one thing that I think Caleb and I really share, not wanting to lose, is being able to stop mid-sermon and process together and then process at the end. And then we often have either a meal before or after where we get to check in on each other. There's a really big shared sense, like maybe not as altruistic as the early church in Acts and Antioch, but it feels like that sense of we're all in this together. There are going to be kids that are crying, and we're going to figure that out. And there's going to be a recording that doesn't work only on the Sundays I preach, but there's always a recording that's not working, and that's okay. Like we're just, our worship leader sometimes is out of town, and so we're not singing that week. And there's just very little expectation other than let's come into this environment together and learn and care for one another and process through our hurts and share our joys.
It's been a cool thought experiment collectively of like, who do we want to become? And for us, it was anchoring a community around some shared rhythms together. One of them being prayer. So I think that's probably been the biggest thing I've just seen is for those that really do want to press in and be vulnerable, it's been a real gift. But for some, it's been, I can't go there. I don't want to go there. And so they leave, and that's fine.
Simone, what would you sort of share with Eden as to the context of Uncommon City?
Yeah, I think very similar to what you guys have shared about Eden and your community. I think our community is kind of the same. When we started with a super small group, just trying to kind of build our rhythm. But a lot of our community, I think, are really curious and hungry to be formed, and that's important to us at Uncommon City because we recognize that a lot of people have been formed to the rhythm of Sunday, and the rhythm of just Sunday is not going to sustain you through life. And so our community that come in on Sunday nights, I guess we'll talk about it a little later, but it's been pretty cool this last Sunday to see them like still kind of even grow to know each other more instead of kind of just sticking with the usual people that you're kind of familiar with, to watch them all kind of like maneuver around, the bar space together, and they're like having conversation and not wanting to leave conversation before we start, our talk has just been really special because that connectivity is growing. I think that kind of describes a little bit of our community. Would you say that, Meeks?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. We're also sort of similar in terms of we do conversation. That's a huge component of our Sunday gathering. We're not trying to be perfect. We're not trying to put on anything. We're just a group of people coming together to enjoy one another, and also enjoy Jesus and learning about Jesus and learning what does it really mean to follow in his way. So both Eden and Uncommon City, we're on this similar path. The communities are very similar. I would even say for Uncommon City, much like Caleb and Brittany both shared, we know that we want to make sure that everything that we're doing is rooted in prayer. I'm curious, Caleb, what you would say to why both Eden and Uncommon City decided to do this thing together.
Yeah, so one of again, I mentioned this earlier, but one of our organizing, I'd say the architecture of our church is around a rule of life. And so one of those statements is anchored in prayer. Like, we want to become a people that are in communion with the Father, Son, and Spirit. And, this was kind of different, changing for me because of my tradition. Like, with prayer was mainly petition, intercession, Had a little bit of a stint of like fiery charismatic in college. But anything around like contemplative or even liturgical or like pre-written prayers, that was all very, very new to me. So this has been a bit of a shift for me personally in that prayer is not even a practice, like it's the thing. It is the end goal. It is like, because it is communion with God, that is the end goal. And so I don't know a better place to start than that. Like if prayer is the start, it's also the end. If it's the umbrella to all the, spiritual practices or disciplines. And so for us, it felt like just a natural like starting place would be in the practice of prayer. To do it together, I mean, for one, I would just say, like, I think Miko and I know that, like, there's kindred spirits there, for sure, just the relationship and all the things. And so I knew I wanted to not only talk about formation, practice formation, like do the stuff like within my own community, but like it would be so helpful to do it together, especially for the things that aren't going well, to hear that, okay, we're not doing something wrong. We're just trying to follow Jesus. And of course, there's going to be resistance. And to hear that from another community with shared language and vision and practice has been so helpful just for me personally to keep going and to keep pursuing. So I would say that that's probably one of the biggest reasons for me.
Yeah, and I think, we had a lot of conversation as we were sort of architecting the actual practice around, specifically around the length of the teaching series, if you will. And part of that, I remember, having a conversation around, man, we don't want to just breeze through this thing. But I remember in that conversation, the primary reason of sort of lengthening the series was because we so believed in this being so formational, so foundational, that we didn't want to breeze through it. We wanted to make sure that we could really slow all of it down. And one of the things that I remember in week 1 that I said to the community was, I have been the architect of series like this. I have put together a prayer series, in all my years of ministry. And I know that when you're in the audience, the message that you're hearing is not the message that you're automatically preaching to yourself, because the message you're preaching to yourself is probably centered around shame, or you're needing to sort of put something on because you want to feel and look like or you're already doing the thing that the person is preaching from the stage. And I wanted to like pull all of that down. And I would also add that one of the beautiful things about doing it with Eden is that Caleb and I get to check in with each other, on the weekends, praying for both churches. And I cannot tell you, like in all my years of doing ministry, like those are the things that are so desperately needed. You're going into a Sunday and you just know that someone 500 miles away is praying for you. And, we're going to be experiencing similar things on the same day. And we get to sort of walk through that throughout the week. Like that's just a beautiful thing. I want to talk about the weeks, because if you guys are anything like me, as you're preparing your talk, there were so many things that you could have said, things that made the cutting room floor, things that you didn't really get to say. And these are our moments. Hopefully, this is our chance to like just share whatever those things were that you wanted to say. What did you hope would resonate from that week, and what is one thing that didn't make it in the sermon for that week?
I guess my like hope was it would be slow. People would be honest. I mean, that was kind of number one for us, is like we said that Teresa of Avila line over and over, like we're all beginners. Like even if you show up and you didn't do anything, that's okay. I think I'm pleased with that. Like, I actually think people have like bought into like, yo, I didn't do it at all, and okay, that's cool. Thanks for sharing. But I'm curious, I guess, as we're getting into this, like, are we kind of moving into more of the like, this is so much, and I'm just like, I'm kind of moving into like apathy and indifference. I don't know. So those are my like curiosities, I think.
I think for us, the thing that I was so like wanting to do more of is to talk about liturgy, to talk about pre-made prayer in a way that's like, I wanted to address the sort of tension elephant in the room. I mean, we're in the South, right? So like even when we talk about practicing the way, which again, we're sort of using their content a little bit. So much of practicing the way is so West Coast, if you will, that we on the East Coast, more specifically in the South, we have to map on this sort of super religiosity, this sort of super spiritual kind of ethos that people sort of walk around with. And in the room, for me, I remember when I first started to say even the phrase pre-written prayer, and I was watching a few people, and that made some people really antsy, because the thought is that pre-written prayer, something that you're having to recite, is more in the Catholic faith, high church. It doesn't have power to it. You know, we like to use that language in the South. It's not quote unquote, spirit led. Even if it was spirit led when it was written, it is no longer spirit led now, you know? And I really wanted to spend some time there because I knew that tension was there, but because I'm very long-winded anyway, I couldn't do it. The reason I wanted to do it is because it pulls you into such rich church history. And I think right now there's just been such a harmful, in my opinion, break away from church history. There are some, you know, some rough things in the church's history for sure, but there are some really beautiful things as well. For us, especially in modern context or in Western context, in the American church context, we've so separated ourselves from church history that we're missing that richness of our faith being passed down generation to generation to generation, meaning the beautiful prayers that give us language to things that we don't have language to right now, walking through the craziness of life that others have. So those are sort of the things that I really wanted to get out. I really wanted to sort of infuse into people, but it didn't make the sermon. Brittany did adoration for Eden, week 2, and it was so good. I immediately, when the sermon wrapped up, I immediately texted Caleb, and I was like, that was a great sermon. I forget what I text, but it was like something I was so thankful to have been able to hear that. What sort of stirred in you as you prepared for that message, and then what hit the cutting room floor?
Oh, one, you're so kind. Thank you so much. I'm just glad it got recorded. First one. I loved preparing for this sermon. It was one of the most fun to put together because it focused on something that we should want to do and should come naturally and does come naturally in many other spaces, but doesn't always feel, or it feels a little contrived when we're trying to do it organically with the Lord. And I had previously gone through a sermon series through the Lord's Prayer that broke it into different sections and talked about how to do it. And I had loved it. It imprinted on me from years ago. And this section was still the one that I felt like was so easy to get hung up on because it feels forced to be like, all right, God, let me tell you all the things that are great about you. You kind of already know. But I'll try to come up with a few and make it not sound like I'm just listing things. But as someone who understands and has many friends that love words of affirmation, I was like, I can do this. I can figure this out. So what really moved in my heart was actually how much easier it was when I removed any of the religiosity from it, right? When I also let go of some um, more recent church tradition, like hyper reformed practices, I felt like I could just get to a space where, really, to be honest, I felt like I was drawing a little bit from the wellness and astrology girlies because I was trying to just, you know, get in a headspace and not overthink religious words that I felt like God needed me to say to him, which I think is a context a lot of us come in with. And we're very fortunate that we have some people that do come from very charismatic backgrounds. And I think the huge benefit of that is that they do not feel the weight that I feel from a Presbyterian church to be so like almost legalistic in approach. And so as I was thinking about adoration, what God kept stirring in me is think about all the things you adore throughout the day that you don't have to think twice about. Now apply that to me and just open your eyes for a second to things that are around you that brought you joy today, and then give credit where it's due, and it start to feel more and more natural. And the thing that I really wanted, our community to take away from that was that adoration shouldn't feel forced, but it does take a little bit of discipline or a little bit of direction to get there. And that adoration doesn't have to look just like repeating, God's main characteristics back to him, and that it's not siloed to just God the ethereal, but to the Godhead separately. And even parsing that out made so much sense to me. And I wanted them to walk away knowing that their way of adoring may not look like their neighbor or their spouse or anyone else's if they're more creative, or if they are more logical minded, then there are ways to do that the Lord has designed for you. And what didn't make and there were so many things. I mean, if I had, as you guys know, if you start a sermon and there are just so many directions you want to take it. And one thing I had started with, and I almost always weave in pop culture because I'm a pop culture junkie and I like relating faith back to it. But I kept looking at different art forms and different messages that we get from pop culture today that are centered around sometimes totally innocuous and sometimes misguided adoration. And I wanted to go down that rabbit hole so badly. I wanted to look at, 18th century art all the way to modern art. I wanted to look at photography styles and show how we are wired for adoration, and then get way more into the depths of, if we are wired this way, why does it feel so stinking hard to do it and to do it well? And it just, I did it a little bit as you heard with some song lyrics, but I did not want to lose the plot of what it meant to adore God. And I just felt like if I went down that tangent, it was going to be really hard to bring it back. And so that's where I ended up landing, was more like, let's discuss the different types of adorations. And remember, and this is something Caleb and I talked about when I was preparing for the sermon, to really bring it back to like, do you understand that God adores you too? And this, Miko, goes back to what you were saying. In some ways, that's even hard for me to say, because coming from a Presbyterian church, you're not allowed to talk about God liking you. You're supposed to talk about how wretched you are. And the idea that God looks on me with any kind of favor, that was actually really, really hard for me to say out loud, to repeat. And my gosh, it is now my favorite practice to start with adoration, because I just start adoring through the song that's stuck in my head. Even if it's a secular song, I might start with, why is this stuck in my head? What about the lyrics appeal to me? Can I find the part of me that's actually incorrectly attached to this? And how could I attune it to God? Or like Caleb knows this because I keep talking about it, but my husband and I are watching Chosen for the first time. And half the time, the way that I'm adoring God is repeating back to him things that I saw reflected in the way the actor is portraying Jesus, and realizing that there is nothing wrong with that. Even though it's not churchy, there's nothing wrong with me saying, God, I love seeing Jesus have a sense of humor. I never thought of that. God, you are funny, So yeah, it was, gosh, I really enjoyed doing it. So thank you, Mika, for all your kind words. It was just fun to help people try to learn how to adore God, something again that we should be able to do, and yet feel so foreign.
So good. Well said. Okay, so let's move into week 3, which was really moving into the second movement of the entire prayer practice. And Caleb, talk to us about the response you saw in the room, or the conversations afterwards for that week.
Yeah, I mean, immediately before I started teaching, I had someone say part of the reason why they don't pray or as consistent or don't feel like it is just really wrestling with the question, does it matter? Like, is God, does he actually listen and care? And this was like 30 seconds before I'm teaching on why it matters. And yes, you should. So I just was like, man, I think this one's for you, but you tell me at the end. And so I did not, when it came to the practices of petition and intercession, because I am pressing more into those individually down in the next 4 weeks, I wanted to give enough where, like, just to answer the question, yes, it does matter. So just start practicing it. But one of the things I really want to press into is, like, specifically with petition, is around unanswered prayer. Like, what happens when we pray and we're commanded to ask and nothing happens? That I did not touch at all, and I almost want to end this whole series with it around unanswered prayer, because that just feels like a lived experience for everybody. So that did not make it, and a lot of the concepts around with intercession, just that you do bear the image, and this is always how it's been done, is that you partner with God to co-rule and steward and manage the earth, and this is how you pick back up that mantle. Just flirted that, because there's so much more that I want to get into that, because I don't actually believe people believe that, like on a bodily level, because similar to what you were saying, Brittany, like, it's hard for us to even get our mind around the fact that God, like, looks at us in love and he has good intentions towards us. When I've even used language of partner before, I've been critiqued. Like, you can't say that. You're not, like, God is, like, so far up here, and you, like, we're nothing. And I'm like, that may be like your tradition, but that is not what the scriptures say. And so, yeah, so there's so much more I want to, like, explore there, that I felt like it would have been irresponsible to, like, try and fit all of that in 3 to 4 minutes. So I just, like, I didn't touch it other than, hey, it does matter. Keep tracking with us.
Yeah, we had a similar, I remember that night we had someone who had just had an incredibly tough Sunday. So Uncommon City meets in the evening, and which is really great, because if during this practice, like, if the topic totally bombs, like, please just text me, and then we'll just do the quick pivot. But we had someone come in. She had an incredibly tough Sunday with her family, and some things that she had been praying for all her life that still just hasn't come to pass, right? And I remember there was a section, I actually think we just put it out on social media, where I was saying, like, sometimes prayer looks like thank you, and sometimes prayer looks like why. And, I was going through that section, and I remember looking over at her, and there was, like, there's, like, that little quiver, where you're just holding back, the tears, because we all do this, right? It's so common. we tend to, the holy words are reserved for prayer. The common language of our emotions and what we're feeling are not. And we sort of toss that away. And God is literally like, no, I want all, I want all of that. And I think all of that, your lament, your cry, your whys, your upset, your, this has not happened yet. Is it ever going to happen? Do you even hear me? Look at my enemies. Look what they are saying to you. All of that stuff is very real. And I remember looking around the room, looking at her specifically, but then around the room, and it looked like there were some light bulbs that were going off around. It's not unholy to simply ask God why, which I think has sort of been mapped onto us. So yeah. Did you guys experience any of that, like more around sort of the that language that we bring to sort of lamenting prayer?
We actually practiced lament corporately that day.
Nice.
And that was one of the things within the teaching that I was even just wrestling with personally, around why there's not space in kind of the modern Western church for that. Like even with singing, it's very kind of wall of sound to kind of drown out even the saints. The transitions are tight so that nobody gets anxious. And and it's very victorious. It's very joyful. And so we actually practiced a song. There's an artist from Boone, North Carolina, where I went, my alma mater. She wrote a song called Darkness. And it's her wrestling with very much what you said, Miko. And I told everybody, listen, this is going to be really uncomfortable because we're not given spaces to practice and even feel this. So we're going to do it, and then we're going to talk about it. And it was, I'm not going to idealize it. Like, it was uncomfortable. And I'm also a sad boy. Like, I love sad boy music. And so that was pretty easy for me, to get on that train. But I loved like feeling that in the room and stepping forward into a corporate expression of lament.
Moving into week 4, Simone, you had that week for Uncommon City where we're talking about confession. I'm curious, what did you discover sort of in your prep? What surprised you? And then what did you feel like you needed to cut?
Yeah, thanks for that. That was fun. Confession is like, I think I even said it in my message that confession is like such a dirty word. Like, we don't want to. It's so attached to shame. I feel like that that people just kind of seize up, when we talk about confession. And first of all, what surprised me is that, again, we're in this beautiful stage of being a new community and coming from, doing full-time ministry to not doing full-time ministry. I had weeks, sometimes days, to prepare a message, and now I work a full-time job outside of what we get to do with Uncommon City. So that alone, just preparing for the message, was like having to lament myself. Like, Jesus, I got this much time. What we gonna do? So that was like an exercise for me within itself, just being able to sit down and prepare a message, and then on confession. But then I thought about it afterwards, how unique, not necessarily unique, because I know that there are other people who do that, who were bivocational. I think that is that what it's called? But I get to bring a message with the perspective of our community. People are working every day and try to find ways to have a relationship with God and meet God and pray to God. So I'm actually kind of grateful now. But I struggled. I had a hard time. How do I talk about confession with our community that makes people not want to just hear the message and then be done with it? How do I help people have a different perspective of what it means to sit in prayer with the Lord and confess? And so I tried to just be light about it initially by just telling a silly little story about myself having to confess. But I think what I really wanted to make sure I did was just to give people an opportunity to practice, kind of just like you said, Caleb, to actually practice confession as a way of conversation between the Lords. I think a lot of times we marry confession with repentance, which yes, you confess, and then that leads you to repentance. But if people only think about confession married with repentance, then the only time that they're really going to confess anything is if they feel like they need to come to the Lord or rededicate, their life, to use that kind of language. So to confess is to continue to have this invitation from the Lord to continue to sit with him and look inwardly and help, examine our own selves, to sit in prayer with God. So I found myself trying to make sure that I didn't steer the message towards a repentance type of thing, but to just keep it with, this is how you just converse. And so I usually like to leave room for some type of practice, usually some long extended time of prayer, or doing the thing that we're praying about. And so, even going back to, Miko, we talked about pre-made prayer. I used David's Psalm, and I specifically went and found another version to speak the Psalm 139 to kind of help people sit in that. And we did that, and it was kind of, I had people close their eyes, and it was really cool to watch people pray that prayer, pray the Psalm 139, asking the Lord to search me and to know me. And there was tension, there was relief, but there was also willingness for people to sit in that and really ask God to come in and sift it all out. So I was surprised at myself. This is more mechanical than anything else, again, just because I come from having to craft X amount of minutes and make sure that I'm like following some kind of stream. But I think that I didn't need the message to be this long 20-minute thing. I just wanted to talk to our community about this really hard thing that is to confess, to look within ourselves and to recognize something is not right, and to invite God into it and to receive his kindness, as opposed to just having this relationship with this sovereign God who, to use your language, Miko, the other night, who's just like going to smite me. No, that's not the God that we have. That's not the Father that we have. Instead, we have this Father that wants to sit with us in these things. So I was surprised in the fact that, like, no, this doesn't have to be perfect. This doesn't have to be like this really perfected message, but we do have an opportunity to sit with these things together and practice confession with one another. And I think we were able to do that. I hope we were.
So you've experienced the first 4 weeks with the community, going through the first 2 movements, moving through those practices. In terms of feedback, in terms of what we think we can sort of pick up at a granular level, in terms of people's participation beyond Sunday into the things that we're talking about, what would be your longing for your community?
I think, given so many things that you said just resonated with me, because the 3 dirtiest words in Christianity have to be repentance, confession, and submission. And so, I think my hope when we're having this conversation with the women in the church and with anyone in the church is that they would I don't even want to hear that their prayer life is getting better, because what is that metric? I would love to hear that it's been consistent, but if they tell me that it's been a battle, that they're angry with the Lord, that they realize that they are deeply frustrated, or that they have felt a sense of shame over something that they cannot move past, I would consider all of those a win, to be honest. I think, and look, I'm in marketing, so I talk about key performance indicators all the time. And if I were to think about metrics of success, it's certainly consistency. I would love to hear that it is getting easier to go in prayer more often, but I would much rather hear that the prayer that is happening is deeper. It feels more meaningful. It feels like I'm actually listening to and being with God and not just talking 3 feet in the air. I want someone to say, I don't like praying. It doesn't come naturally to me. Great. Let's discuss that. Yeah, I think I share, I'm not a sad boy like Caleb is, which is why we balance each other out really nicely. I'm like I'm the Ted Lasso of our team.
Love that.
But I read a quote today in one of my newsletters, The Pour Over, if you're familiar, and it said, "A wound that goes unacknowledged and unwept is a wound that cannot heal." And I think that is something that hit me pretty hard, that I think part of why we don't enjoy prayer or that we feel not good at it is that there is a lot of unwept over wounds. And if you have ever done any deep mental health work with a counselor, you know how hard it is to do that. And if he is also a great counselor, I think getting into the practice of weeping before him over things is just as important as the more fun parts of adoration and asking.
I agree with all those things that you just said, Brittany, and I want that. I want that for our community as well. I think something that I'm really longing for as we continue our series and our journey in prayer is that people's relationship with the Lord would change, and the way that they relate to the Lord would change. I think I hear a lot of conversation, and I have a lot of conversation, mainly with the women in our community that are not able to approach God as Father, that are not able to approach God as friend, that believe with their minds because they say it with their mouth, and they've been trained in church to say that they believe that God answers their prayers, but to actually really like trust, trust that, when they talk to him, he listens, that, when they lament, he cares. And so I want people's relationship and approach to change. And I think the way that we see that is kind of just like what you said, with those just raw questions, and that this sucked. This is hard. I feel like, what am I doing? And then also to see the journey and the evolution of that is to see, where people are realizing, oh no, I had a great time just being quiet because I felt God's presence. I would love to see that progression, because people have different ways of relating or coming into a better way, and better, I hate to say better, but better than they did before, ways of relating to God.
I don't know. Oh, that was so well said. I mean, I think the only thing I would add, and this is just culturally for us, I say this a lot, we're not trying to be impressive, we're just trying to be honest. I don't see a world, and this was one of my biggest takeaway from the confession teaching was we get it so backwards around revival and renewal, that it doesn't come on the back of gifting or all of that. It comes on the back of, are we going to really be honest with each other? And so I really want, because this has been true for me with any practice, especially prayer, it has to get worse before it gets better. Because I think that's just the way of the kingdom, is death that leads to resurrection. And so somewhere in all of this, we have to die in order to fully live. And I think that's true even in prayer. And so I'm hoping for death that leads to real resurrection fruit within the life of Eden. I pray that for Uncommon City as well.
Caleb, Brittany, Simone, thanks for joining on today's podcast. We just want to let you know that Caleb and I are going to return in the next episode with people from our actual community, and we're going to be asking them what they've been experiencing as we've journeyed through the prayer practice. And again, all of this is, number one, to help sort of continue to tie Eden and Uncommon City in this series that we're doing together, and to learn from one another and to hear what's going on in their community, in their area of the country, and vice versa. But the other is because doing this stuff in community is so important and it's so rich, and we want to find really creative ways to continue to deep dive into the prayer practice. So that said, whether you're part of Eden or Uncommon City, or just you happen to find us, we're so thankful that you're part of those communities. We're so thankful that you spent time with us today, and until next time, peace to you.